This is Sportswatch on 6 News. I'm Leo Puglisi, back here with Lachlan Sheriff. We said he'd be back next week. We said that last week. We said Tinuin would be here. That has not happened, so I have landed myself in this chair again. But it's good to chat, and it's been a huge past few days in sport. And look, it all started, of course, with the A-League men's grand final on Saturday, which we'll get to in a sec. But it's a story I want to start with that's been developing kind of as we've been recording this, and I'm sure it's going to continue developing, which is the future of the Tasmanian Football Club. Now, it's not often, and I don't think it's a good sign that we're talking about this club potentially dying before it's played a single game of VFL, let alone AFL. The current situation, for those who've been unfamiliar, is to cut a long thing short, the Tasmanian opposition, which is the Labor Party, is moving a no confidence motion in the government over a bunch of things involving the budget. Now, one of the big things, if people have been following regarding money, is the stadium cost, the Macquarie Point Stadium. That is costing a lot of money, more money than people thought. And so, amongst other issues, that has become a bit of a fractured point in Tasmania. Now, of course, it should go without saying, as you'd know, Sheriff, is that there are plenty of people who are like, yes to the team, absolutely, but are a bit iffy on the stadium. That stadium requirement, I don't see a reality where this team can really be delivered right now if that full stadium with the roof is a requirement from the AFL. Can you?
No, I can't either. Look, obviously Tasmanian football has been played there for a while now. You've got Hawthorn playing down there, North Melbourne playing down there. But if you want a full team down there, you have to build a new stadium. Obviously, they want one out at Macquarie Point. For me, the roof has to be an essential. You look at Tasmania; it's going to be freezing down there, and obviously, it's an outdoor sport. But I think it has to be. The AFL have made it clear they want the roof, so I think you kind of have to try to adjust that. Now, do I think that the Tasmanian Devils could die before they even become a team because of the stadium? I'll be honest, I can't say that yet. Obviously, this is a developing situation. Do have a lot more to play out, but as of right now, I couldn't see Tasmania folding before it even starts. But no, it's definitely an interesting situation to keep an eye on over there in Tasmania.
Well, the people in the club seem to think it's going to die or is at risk of, because you had Kath McCann come out in a press conference just about an hour before we're recording this, where she said, and I quote, "What this looks like is uncertainty. It's a risk to invest. It looks like a state that's not unified." She broke down in tears during this press conference. So they clearly, and some of the kind of backgrounding that's been given to other media in Tasmania and the reporting there indicates that they're absolutely not certain about this. Look, in terms of where the Tassie Football Club sits at the moment, there have been a few senior football academy games, which is it's really the talent league team doing that, not so much the senior team. The Tassie Devils were supposed to, or are supposed to, enter the VFL next year as a senior team coming in. So similar how Gold Coast was in the VFL before the AFL, and GWS was in the TAC Cup before, or actually in the NEFL before they went in as a senior team in the AFL. Look, they've got to kind of move fast on this. They have two grounds. You'd think they could just keep it going temporarily at the moment. They're not bad grounds in terms of facilities. Yes, it's no, ideal situation for a top level club, but why can't they just play at these?
Well, I don't see why they couldn't for the VFL, at least. Like you mentioned, they're going to be in the VFL for a few years. For me, both the stadiums they've got down there in Tasmania are wonderful VFL grounds. I do think the main problem is once you get to the AFL, once you get that AFL license, playing against some big teams, playing against Collingwood, Carlton, Eston, Hawthorn, you name it, there's going to be a lot of fans there, and you do need a big and a more developed stadium for those games. So I agree with you. I don't see why they couldn't play games there, at least for the VFL. Once we get to the AFL stage, that might be when things get a little murky for me because I'm not sure if that'll work.
I'm not so sure on the roof requirement. I get the reasons for it. I get it. I don't think rain is so much the concern. It really is just the cold there, in Hobart. But at the same time, if it is just the roof that's kind of ballooning the cost, and you can do the stadium without the roof. I mean, at some level, you'd want to compromise because, again, that is really the future of the club. Again, in terms of where the AFL's agenda is coming in here, regardless of maybe, public positions or even government positions, because we know that both major parties, I think practically every party in the Tasmanian Parliament does support the existence of a Tassie team in the AFL. But if the roof is the sticking point here, if that's ballooning out the cost, surely there could be some kind of compromise. That'd be enough. Because I don't think any of us wants to see this team die before it plays an official game.
No, of course not. No one wants to see that. I think a roof in Tasmania would be good. Obviously, like you said, very cold. Rain not necessarily an issue, but those are June, July games will be very chilly. But at the end of the day, it is AFL. These are very highly paid athletes. I'm sure they will be fine playing there, even if it's 6, 7 degrees. I don't see why that would be an issue. So look, if the roof is the only thing that is a problem, I'm sure there could be a compromise. They'll obviously have to go through the AFL, they have to go through the government. So it's definitely a space to watch. I know things are looking dire. However, I cannot imagine that this club, where keep in mind, there's been so much hype for this club. There's been so many members who have already bought those memberships we saw earlier in the year. So look, do I think that the Tasmanian Devils could potentially die before they play a game of footy purely over a roof? I don't. I think if the roof is the only problem, we'll try and find a compromise somewhere. However, if there are more problems, then that could be where we start getting into sticky situations. I still don't think they'll fold before they play a game, but it's definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, and look, we'll see if they're actually able to muster up a VFL team next year, which I know I've a vested interest in, but that's a separate story. We'll keep watching that. Of course, any coverage of the Tasmanian Parliament and government situation is on Six News for those who are looking for it. Sticking with the AFL to a bit more of an established team, Sydney. They're really bad at the moment. And look, I can, hold my nose as a Hawthorn supporter here for a second, and they've clearly been good in recent seasons. They were a grand finalist last year. I mean, remember the first like 10 rounds of last year's season as well. They were at a ridiculous level in terms of the way they were going. It was thought that, premiership almost guaranteed at some level. That, of course, didn't happen. Right now, they're, competing with, some of the lowest of the low clubs at this point. What's happened? I don't get it. On paper, their list looks good. It is a good list. I don't think Dean Cox is a bad coach by any stretch. And I don't think, of course, 10 games in, you can put too much blame on a new coach anyway. What's happened here?
I mean, look, there's definitely a multitude of reasons on why the Swans have struggled this year. I think you can look at, for example, obviously grand final in 2024, they got smashed. Grand final in 2022, they got smashed. That takes a mental toll on the players. The biggest day, the one game in September we all talk about, to go out there not once but twice in 3 years and lose both of them, not even close, it is going to take a mental toll on the players. I do believe maybe has resulted in a bit of an unraveling. You look at, for example, Adelaide in 2017, they had a pretty poor showing in the grand final and it set their club back like 5 years. It could be the same with Sydney. Of course, it's not the only reason. I'm sure there are other possible reasons, but that's one of them. Dean Cox, like you said, he's 10 games into his coaching career. I don't think you can put the blame on him. Look, we've seen these succession plans. Obviously, he had one with John Longmire. We saw it, for example, at Eston with Worsfold and Rudden. That didn't really work out. We saw it at Hawthorn with Clarkson and Mitchell. That one has worked a little better, obviously. So, look,
We'll
they're a
find
bit
out
hit
what
and miss.
happens with Port Adelaide as well.
And Port Adelaide as well. It's another one. So, look, they're a little hit and miss, these succession plans. Again, Dean Cox cannot take the majority of the blame. He is a new coach. It's going to take him a little time. I'm sure he's already doing a pretty solid job, but it's going to take him a little time to maybe get to the level John Longmire was at. It'll take his players a little more time to get used to him. So I still think he'll be in a job at the end of the year. However, look, the results just aren't good looking, are they? That Adelaide game on Saturday was just really, really terrible. So something else have to change there and pretty
Well, they're
fast.
playing Richmond at the MCG this week. That in itself would not be an unrealistic loss. It's 16th, 14th. Richmond clearly, I think, has exceeded expectations, which were already about as low as you could get for this year. They're doing well considering many circumstances. Not saying they're doing great, obviously, but again, I think they've done better than I thought, and I reckon that you thought as well. You reckon they could do it? You reckon Richmond could beat Sydney?
I do. I really think they could. I mean, you can look at the games Richmond have won. You can look at, for example, they Colin, they beat West Coast, some good games. I'd almost look at it from the point of last weekend where they should have beaten West. Obviously, they threw it away and they have to cop that. But look, Richmond was still right there with one of the best teams in the comp for the majority of the game. They lost by 3 points in the end. So I think you can take that back home this weekend against a Sydney team who, compared to West, have been awful this year. I think you look at that. I think Richmond can go out there confidently knowing that they have every shot of winning this game. So I do. I do think Richmond will beat Sydney over the weekend.
The other spoon bowl game I just do want to get your thoughts on quickly. North Melbourne versus West Coast in Bunbury for some reason because that's the agreement North have. Who do you got there? I'm not sure who to pick other than like the only thing in my head is like West Coast don't have to travel as much, give them that point. Because again, it's West Coast and North, It's
I mean, it's been the Spoon Bowl game for the last 5 years. Let's be honest. Look, it is a little weird that West Coast are the away team, North Melbourne the home team, and yet North Melbourne are the one doing interstate flights. I don't know if they really thought that through, but look, I do think both teams have been slightly better this year compared to what they've been 2024, 2023. Obviously, that's not saying much, but nonetheless, I do believe that West Coast with the obviously they'll have the fans, which again is weird. It's a away game for them. They'll have the fans. They'll have done less travel, and look, they played Geelong pretty well on the weekend. I was watching that game on the Sunday night. They were right there with them for a good chunk of three quarters. So I will tip West Coast in that one.
Yeah, we'll see on that. Now, moving over to the other football and the only other one we don't talk about rugby league, is the A-League men's grand final. You would be very, very happy, of course. Melbourne City coming off 1-0 winners there against Melbourne Victory, the first ever derby grand final. Amazing atmosphere, amazing crowd, pretty solid game as well. Not by necessarily the best grand final in terms of performance if I'm watching as a neutral there, but still I think it was a good game and I was watching pretty intensely the entire time. You were up there less so amongst the crowd, but in terms of what you saw in terms of the actual game performance, what did you make of it? Because I mean, first goal was in 10 minutes and that was it. And I don't really think Victory had many realistic chances after that.
No, I don't think they did either. And I mean, look, you can talk about Felds and entertaining from a neutral perspective. I'd almost say from a casual perspective, it wasn't as interesting as they would have liked, an AFL fan or a rugby league fan tuning in for their first A-League game ever, seeing a 1-0 with the only goal 10 minutes in. Maybe not those exhilarating games. But I do think for the people who have been watching this league for a while, it was still a good game. Not a great game, perhaps, but a good game. You had Melbourne City striking early through Jonathan Cohen. He scored. After that, I probably would say Victory had slightly more chances. From what I remember, and look, it's all a bit of a blur that night now, but I don't think City really had any more true chance of scoring, maybe one or two, maybe one in the second half. But aside from that, I think Victory had a couple of chances. I think the most controversial one we'll talk about is the handball, not the first half one. I think that was fine. The one in the second half when it got headed onto by his own teammate, hit his hand. Look, for me, I'll be honest, I'm not sure what the rules are. I think it's a pretty stonewall one, as in whatever the rules are, go by that. I don't think it's a 50-50. So, he wasn't looking at the ball. Hand sticked out. Obviously, hand shouldn't be there, but it's a hard one to call. End of the day, well done to Melbourne City because they had to go out there for a good 80 plus minutes and hold on against a pretty good victory side. So they definitely deserved it. Again, maybe not the most entertaining game, but no, on the pitch, well done to Melbourne City because they definitely deserved that.
Yeah, and look, I tend to take the view in most sports that unless it's the last, 5 seconds, which it wasn't, um, blaming the umpire or blaming the ref for the loss is just not, it doesn't work. They had a lot of chances, Victory. It just, just watching it, it literally just kept going over and over and over, and they just were not able to get it in. It really didn't look like they had many chances. By the 75th minute, you were thinking City had this as well. It just didn't feel like there was that last second comeback. As much as, again, from a neutral perspective, I would have loved that. I would have loved it to drag on throughout the night. It would have been amazing to watch. Maybe not so much for you. I'm sure you're happy to get it over after about 95 minutes. But look, it just look, again, go with whatever the rule was there. I think again, pretty even call. But again, it was not a deciding factor in this game. They clearly just were not up to it. I did think though going in, I said this last week with Tin that I thought Victory maybe had a bit more momentum. A victory against Auckland on the road, undeniably significant, especially given Auckland were the premiers this year. That in itself was huge. City obviously were coming off what was on the night a 1-1 draw to Western United, of course, winning 4-1 on aggregate there. But at the end of the day, I guess, you look at the ladder, City were better than Victory all year, and I think that might have been displayed on Saturday night.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I understand the momentum claim. Look, that 2-0 win by Victory in Auckland, obviously a great win. You compare that to Melbourne City, who, let's be real, the tie was over by halftime in the first leg in that City West United tie. I don't even think they were going 100% in the second leg. It was a pretty dull game. I was at that one as well.
Yeah, they
But
didn't
sometimes
need
that's
to.
also what you need. Fun.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't need to do anything on the second leg of the semi-final. City. They could have just sit back there. I mean, 3-0 starting that aggregate was about as easy as it gets for them.
Of course, yeah. So look, you can go into that thinking, okay, victory has the momentum. They've probably taken last week a bit more seriously, which is pretty good for them. So going to that game, I'm sure there are a lot of people tipping victory to finish the job, get over Auckland. But I in the end, I do think victory might have just cost themselves with not even just necessarily the finish, just their attacking play in general, because there were so many opportunities. You look victory getting up the pitch, especially in that second half, thinking, wow, this is going to be the moment they equalise. And for me, it just never looked like really too much in danger of happening. I think Nathaniel Atkinson was superb every time they went over his wing. He tackled him pretty much. So I think he was superb. I think pretty much the whole City back four was superb. So to me, it was a well thought out win for City, a good defensive performance. So victory kind of have to cop that, but nonetheless, a great game and really enjoyed being there. On Melbourne City.
Yeah, it was a good game, and again, the atmosphere has been discussion, and we've covered it elsewhere about crowd, but again, it was just amazing, and for that to be that record crowd, it gives you hope. And again, looking at the next season, of course, coming up of both the A-League, and there's always uncertainty around certain clubs, less so Victory and City, of course, but of course you've got the Championship coming in. I think it's an exciting time in the round ball game, and certainly you'd hope that this kind of momentum can continue. Maybe we'll kind of see it at the Australia Cup. You'd hope that people, don't take their eyes off round ball for that period. But look, we'll wait. We'll wait and see carefully there. And we just also want to get on to the Australian Ice Hockey League. Huge weekend, of course, with the Canberra Brave at the AIS Arena. A massive move. Tim described it last week as being that North American feel. You look at the photos that have come out. You look at the insane crowd, of course, by then. You have to remember, I love Canberra, but Canberra's not a big place. Canberra's a very small market. You look at the crowd, you look at the atmosphere, you look at the game, and again, you just look at the facilities, and you're like, that in Australia, I mean, that's fantastic. I'm sure you've seen the images as well.
For sure. I mean, Tin was right. It was definitely a North American feel, not necessarily NHL, but there's a pretty good levels of hockey over there in the NHL. Definitely felt like one of those. So we're on to Canberra because, like you said, small place, small market, but sometimes that's good. Sometimes that means there's a moment to strike because, I mean, aside from Canberra United, who are in the A-League Women's, and then you look at like maybe on Jerry West, who sometimes play out in Canberra. But aside from that, there really is there was Canberra in the NRL as well. But aside from that, there really is a market to strike here for Canberra in the AIHL because obviously you look at places like Melbourne and Perth and Adelaide. These places already have big sporting teams. It's been kind of hard for the AIHL to leave a mark there. But Canberra's really where they can shine because this is again a small city, but still the people in that city, not much sport going on there. So I think it's great. Say what a great turnout they had. Like you said, definitely was probably a North American vibe. I think you compare that. I've only gone to the Brown Ice House myself, which in its own right has been an incredible atmosphere, but I'm sure over in Canberra it was definitely a next step up. So look, the photos look great. I'm really happy for Canberra that this has been pulled off because it's great for the IHL and it's definitely great for them.
Another big over the weekend, of course, you had the second Melbourne derby for 2025, the Mustangs taking that in overtime. With that said, though, Melbourne Ice, they're now 7 points clear at the top. That's actually above the Mustangs. And we know as well, you've got the next derby that's sold out. I believe the one after that is almost sold out last time I checked. I could be sold out by the time this goes to air. And that's just, again, really part of the support that's kind of been growing here. I know in Melbourne, of course, around the country is good, but to have a derby is always exciting, as we've literally just seen in the A-League over the weekend, because it really builds up that atmosphere, and it really just having some kind of rivalry within the city, not necessarily based on geography, just these two Melbourne teams, that ups the atmosphere, it gets the crowds in, and I think it's just been proven it's worked really well so far this season. And I'm hopeful I'll be able to get to an AIHL derby sometime later in the year. But you and Tina have been to games, and again, the atmosphere's just looking really solid at this point.
It is. I unfortunately couldn't get out to the derby on our Friday night, but what I saw was great. Welcome to the Mustangs. It was a pretty good win in overtime. But you look at this. There's, like I said, when I went to the first derby early in the year, there was a huge. I was actually surprised just by how good the atmosphere was. Like you look at the shopping centre outside O'Brien Ice House. It's been overtaken by hockey fans. Like you walk through those, there's a few little restaurants. It's near where the Melbourne I used to be. I'm not sure if people know where that is, but look, you walk through those restaurants and it's full of people in hockey shirts, and there's just this real hockey vibe going on between these two local teams, which is wonderful. I love that. I love seeing that, and again, I'm sure it was the same in the last derby we had on Friday night. So, no, well done to both teams because they're definitely getting out there and supporting. And I'm sure it's only going to get better because you look at this, the Mustangs now, they've won the derby. They can go on, field men for that. The Ice have had a pretty good season. Not only that, but they have also just signed a former NHL player by the name of David Booth, who played for the Canucks, played for the Red Wings, the Maple Leafs, and the Panthers. So, look, this is a guy who has had a pretty impressive career. So, having him out here in Melbourne is going to be pretty awesome. I'm sure that's only going to up the ante. I can't wait to see him on the ice for the ice, especially in those upcoming two derbies. So, look, it's a great place to be out now in Melbourne. It's a great time they're having there in the AHL, and it is really great to see in general.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep covering all that closely. That's Sportswatch for this week. Tinuin may or may not be back next week. Lachlan Sheriff may or may not be back next week. So I don't know. You might see me again, but we'll keep covering everything closely, including again for those wanting the latest on the Tasmanian Parliament situation and the future of the Tassie Devils in relation to that. We'll be covering that on Six News closely. Thanks everyone for tuning in.